Is the 2021 housing bubble in America the biggest of all time, and will the subsequent crash be even worse than the one that occurred in 2008? That's the topic that I'm going to cover in today's video, and I'm going to give you guys the hard data you need to understand which cities, which markets here in 2021 could be facing a 2008 style crash where values go down by 30, 40, or even 50%. That's right. Certain markets back in 2008 lost 50% of their value, and homeowners back then lost everything. So let me tell you, if you're a potential home buyer right now or real estate investor, it's never been more important to use data and to actually understand real estate history, because by taking a walk back into the past and understanding how much prices declined in the last housing crash across certain cities, and more importantly, why certain cities got hit so hard in that last housing crash, by understanding that, you can fast forward here to 2021 and gain key insights about the cities that you should be avoiding right now in August 2021, as well as the ones that you should actually be targeting. So as always, it's going to be a very data-heavy video. Make sure to bring your attention spans, but if you stick with me through the end, I promise you're going to learn a lot. Let's get into it. So, all right, everyone, we're going to start by looking at a map, as we usually do. And on this map, we are looking at the percentage change in home values across over 300 metro areas in America from 2007 to 2012. So this is essentially measuring how much home prices declined in the last housing crash across America. And the redder the metro area looks, the more prices declined. The more translucent it looks, the more kind of it was like an average price decline. And then the greener it looks, in some cases, prices stayed the same or actually went up. And so you can immediately see there was big differences across America in how the housing crash impacted certain areas. And let's just start with some of the dark red. And I think one of the first things that probably pops out to you is Florida. You know, a place like Orlando, home values declined by 53% in the last crash. The typical value, according to Zillow, this is data from Zillow, went down from 282,000 to 131,000. Like, imagine that if you were a homeowner in Orlando back in, like, you had bought in 05, 06, 07, you got absolutely destroyed. Same thing in Miami. Prices there went down by 52%. Same thing in Tampa. Prices went down by 49%. You can see really here all of Florida just got hit really, really hard, around a 50% price decline across the state. Some other areas that got hit really hard, if we zoom over, would be Arizona. Phoenix in particular, values went down by 54% in the last crash. More than half, going from 291,000 typical price to 135,000 typical price. Again, put yourselves in the shoes of a Phoenix homeowner back in 06, 07, 08 who bought around that period and how painful that was for them. And we can really see here most of the West Coast got hit hard. Vegas lost 63%, Riverside, California lost 52%, Los Angeles lost 37%, San Francisco lost 32%, Boise lost 36%. I mean, it was really a bloodbath across all of the West Coast of America as well as Florida. Now, as we can see, not every area got hit hard. We have some green on this map. You know, if we were to go to a place like Oklahoma City, home prices actually increased slightly in the last housing crash. They went up by about 1% in Oklahoma City. If we were actually to go to a place like Austin, Texas in the last housing crash, prices only went down by 4%. It was a moderate decline of only 4% in Austin last time around. Dallas was also a moderate decline, around 9%. If we go further up to a place like Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh actually gained 3% in value. A place like Buffalo gained 2.5% in value. So it's important to remember, while some areas got hit really hard in the last housing crash, other areas didn't really feel it at all. Now, I think a really interesting question to ask, which I'm sure some of you are already wondering, is why did certain markets get hit so hard last time? Like, why did Miami and Phoenix and Riverside and LA, get hit so hard? And then why did other markets not get hit hard, like Oklahoma City and Austin and Pittsburgh? And that's a great question to ask, because understanding that fundamentally is going to give you such key insights into which markets you need to target and avoid here in 2021, which markets you should go for security, and which markets you should avoid because they have real downside. And there was really one big variable one big variable that explained the last housing crash, explained most of it on its own. This metric was actually the number one predictor, and I'm going to show you what that is right now. So on this graph, we're comparing on the y-axis how much home prices went down from 07 to 2012. That's the same data point we were just looking on the map. But we're comparing it to how much home prices went up in the 5 years prior. How much did they go up from 2002 to 2007? And you can immediately see that there's a very strong relationship between these two variables. How much prices went up before the crash and then how much they went down during the crash. And basically the story is, the more that prices went up rapidly beforehand, the more that they declined. So if we go and look at a place like Las Vegas, prices went up by 90% from 02 to 06, but then they went down by 64% from 07 to 2012. Much the same in a place like Phoenix. Prices went up by 85% and then down by 53%. Similar story in Miami. Prices actually more than doubled before the crash, and then that doubling was completely erased by a 52% price decline during the crash. And we can see other markets here like Los Angeles, San Diego, Tucson, Seattle, San Francisco, and Portland all were kind of a similar story. They're in the lower right quadrant of this graph, which means high appreciation beforehand, high depreciation during the crash. If you guys are enjoying the data presented in this video and you want to learn more about the housing market and what's going on in your city, then just hit that like button. I produce tons and tons of this content, 3 videos per week covering markets across the country. When you hit the like button, it allows me to actually produce more of this content going forward. Additionally, make sure to comment. Let me know what you're seeing in your market. When you guys comment, it actually makes these videos better, so make sure to do that as well. All right, guys, let's get back to the video. But what gets really interesting is when we move to this top left quadrant. And in this top left quadrant with the more translucent and green dots, these are the markets that actually weathered the storm of the last housing crash really well. And why did they weather that storm? Well, quite simply because prices never went up by much to begin with, right? We have, for instance, Austin, Texas. Prices only went up by 10% in the 5 years before the crash, and thus they only went down by 4% during the crash. Similar story in a place like Dallas. Prices only went up by 18%, so they only went down by 9%. Same thing goes in Oklahoma City, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, Denver. These markets never really had much of a bubble, so they didn't have much of a crash. And it almost seems like it shouldn't be that simple, right? That simply it's the rampant price appreciation which then predicts the rampant price deceleration in the crash. Like, how could it be that simple? And I initially had some resistance to accepting this when I first started understanding what the data historically said. But then the more I looked into it, the more I understood it. Because when you really think about the housing market, it's actually traditionally, historically, a very stable market, very mature market that doesn't appreciate by much. Over the long term in America, over the last 100 years, home prices and inflation have basically moved in lockstep with each other. And 2-3% per year, that's like what typical home price growth is. Because that's basically what the levels of inflation and wage and job growth are. 2-3% a year. So home prices tend to track those fundamentals. Except for only 2 times in U.S. history. One of those times was from about 2000 to 2006, before the last housing crash, was when home prices really accelerated well above inflation, wages, jobs. And then the other time is the last 5 years. Those are the only 2 times in U.S. history where the housing market has really gone off on a rocket ship above what those fundamentals dictate. And I'm going to start with an example so you guys can really understand what I'm talking about and understand what to look for in your market to key you in of whether you're in a bubble and you're going to have price declines. And we're comparing 3 lines on this graph. The green line is the cumulative increase in home prices. The blue line is the increase in wages. And then the orange line is the percentage increase in jobs since 2007, cumulatively. And we're looking at that data for the Dallas metro area. The Dallas metro area on this graph. And what I think is kind of interesting is if we go from 2007 all the way to pretty much, early 2016, for 9 years basically, these 3 lines moved in relative lockstep with each other. When wages and jobs went down, home prices went down, but when jobs and wages recovered, home prices recovered, and they moved in lockstep. The fundamentals were aligned. The housing market was aligned with the fundamentals. But then starting in 2016, Dallas just began separating. The housing market began separating from the fundamentals, and prices just kept going up, up, and up to the point today where prices have gone up by 92% since '07, yet wages and jobs have only gone up by 27%. So home prices have literally gone up more than 3 times faster on a relative basis than the underlying economic fundamentals. And that's a problem. That's a problem for a market like Dallas, which is starting to look like, some of the Miami and Phoenix markets of '06, '07, where we just have crazy price detachment, crazy price appreciation that's not supported by underlying fundamentals. Another market that's like this would be Denver. Denver, which is what we're looking at on this graph. And again, you can see that prices in Denver have gone up by 103% since 2007. They've more than doubled, yet wages have only gone up by 45% and jobs have only gone up by 22%. And so I think in a market like Denver, a lot of people try to justify the appreciation by saying, oh, well, the underlying economy is just doing so well. Well, we're looking at this graph, and maybe 45% wage growth and 22% job growth is pretty good, relatively speaking, but it's not even close to supporting the home value growth in a place like Denver. Now we're taking a look at Austin. And you can see Austin actually is kind of different from the previous two, because Austin, up until COVID actually, up until like late 2019, you could actually say home prices in Austin were fairly well supported by the growth in jobs and the growth in wages, right? Like they were fairly close together. Maybe Austin was in a little bit of a bubble, but it wasn't big. But then over the last year, oh my God, prices in Austin have just gone berserk, through the roof, up now 124% from where they were in '07, whereas jobs are up 50%, wages are up 42%. And so like Dallas, like Denver, Austin is another market where we see this price appreciation just blow out what the local economic fundamentals are suggesting. Now, the interesting thing about those 3 cities, Austin, Denver, Dallas, is that they're ones that dodged the last housing crash. They didn't really get hit that hard. And I actually think that that's a negative this time around, that if your market dodged the last housing crash and is now experiencing rampant appreciation, I think that's a bad thing. Because what it suggests is that locals, local builders, local developers, local realtors, local owners, they don't have any concept of what a housing crash is. They don't think it's possible in their market, and thus it makes it even more likely to occur. And so the funny thing actually is that when you look at markets like Phoenix and Miami and Vegas, markets that got hit really hard last time around, they actually seem more supported in their economic underlying fundamentals today, in terms of prices, wages, and job growth, which is kind of the irony in all this, is that when you did have a big housing crash back then, like prices went down so much that the price level today is more closely aligned with what the local economic fundamentals suggest, because there's a certain inherited collective wisdom that occurs in the market that has already experienced that type of housing crash. Like the fact that Miami is still only 10 to 15 years removed from 50% price declines means that a lot of the local developers, realtors, owners, they still remember that last crash. And it's thus, there might be a certain level of caution that exists in these markets that doesn't in Austin, Dallas, or Denver, because they've seen it before. And no better place can you see this is the level of new building and inventory. How many new homes and apartments were being built? There's a big problem in '04, '05, '06 was that way too many new homes and apartments were being built in certain cities. And so what we're looking at on this graph are the number of permits pulled for single family new construction. This is only new construction, has nothing to do with renovations, in 4 metros across the US over the last 25 years. Austin in green, Nashville in yellow, Vegas in red, Miami in blue. And if we go back to '03, '04, '05, we can see a place like Vegas was just pulling an insane amount of permits for new single-family homes, as was a place like Miami, right? 25,000 in Miami, up to 35,000 in Vegas. And then, of course, we had the housing crash, and permitting and building for new homes collapsed. 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14. What we can see is that Vegas today has only permitted 13,000 new single-family homes over the last 12 months. So that's like almost only like 1/3 the level Vegas was permitting and building before the last crash. So Vegas is building way less, way fewer new homes this time around. Same with Miami. Miami has only pulled permits for 9,000 new single-family homes over the last 12 months compared to 26,000 before the last crash. Vegas and Miami, likely because of the inherited wisdom and caution developed during the last housing crash, isn't building as much, and it's less likely that they're going to overbuild into a housing glut. Not the case in Austin and Nashville, though. So we can see Austin actually is the leader in all of these metros, which is Austin Metro has pulled 27,000 new permits for single-family homes. That's well above the 20,000 that Austin pulled in the peak of the last bubble. So Austin is building way more new housing today than they did in the last housing crash. Same goes for Nashville, another market that really didn't get hit hard last time around, but now is experiencing crazy price appreciation. While Nashville's pulled permits for 18,000 new single-family homes the last 12 months, they peaked at around 15,000 in the last crash. So basically this graph has flipped. 03, 04, 05, it was Vegas and Miami that were building the most. Today, it's Austin and Nashville building the most. And that's why I really believe a lot of these markets that missed the last housing crash are going to get hit the hardest during this one because they never had a chance to learn any of the lessons. And people in a place like Austin or Dallas right now, or Nashville or Denver, they think they're invincible in terms of the housing market. Homeowners, developers, realtors, everyone thinks they're invincible because they've never really seen a big housing crash. But when you actually look at the fundamentals in the data, they fit all the criteria for a big housing crash. They fit the same exact criteria that places like Vegas and Miami had in the mid-2000s. So I've only had a chance to cover about 7 or 8 different metros across the US so far in this video. I want to cover more than that. So what I'm going to do now is a rapid fire round. What's a rapid fire round? Well, I'm going to go back to that graph on home price growth, job growth, and wage growth. I'm going to hit up 10 metro areas in quick succession, and hopefully I'll hit yours. So let's get into it. Rapid fire round. Let's go. Washington, D.C. looks much more secure now than it did in the last housing crash. Wage growth, 35%, well above what the price growth of 11% since 07 is. So D.C. looks more secure than it did before the last crash. Boston, somewhere in between. Price growth and wage growth are pretty close at plus 45%. I don't like seeing the fact that this price growth is like way above what the job growth is. So Boston, I'm not predicting a big crash in Boston, but maybe it will get hit somewhat just because the underlying job growth in the market isn't really there. San Jose definitely looks frothy. Prices are up by 74% in San Jose compared to 34% wage growth, 18% job growth. And this is a market that actually did get hit hard in the last crash. And even though it did get hit hard, prices are way back above wages. That's a warning sign in San Jose. Seattle, also a similar situation. Seattle was hit hard in that last crash. You can see big price declines. However, home prices have really marched their way back up well above what those wages are. And actually take a look, guys. Average hourly wage in Seattle has been declining the last 2 years. That's not good. That's a worrisome sign. Atlanta, Georgia is another market where also home prices got hit really hard in the last crash, but they have vaulted back up above wages and prices. However, 45% price growth compared to 27% wage growth, that's not terrible. And so I don't think Atlanta is going to get hit as hard, but a moderate reduction in prices is a possibility. So here's Nashville. We covered Nashville from a permit perspective. We know we're building way more in Nashville now than we used to be, and while we're building more with rapidly accelerating price growth above wages, above job growth. That wage and job growth is pretty impressive at plus 31% and plus 48%, but I think there is some downside in this market given how much permitting has increased and how fast prices are accelerating over the last year. Here's Chicago. Now, Chicago is a market that I actually think is fairly secure right now. Prices in Chicago are still actually slightly below where they were in the last housing crash, if you could believe that, and wages are up by 32%. Now, the job situation isn't great. Jobs have gone down actually over the last 15 years, especially due to COVID. But given that wage growth is so far above job growth, I don't think Chicago has a big crash in its future. This is the New York metro area, and to be clear, the metro area of New York is really big. It's not just New York City. It also covers Long Island, northern New Jersey, and Westchester, as well as parts of Pennsylvania. So this is a lot more than just New York City. And we can actually see here that prices are only 14% above where they were in the last crash, but wages are 42% higher than the last crash. Job situation, not great. 2% job growth, obviously a big drop off due to the pandemic. I don't think New York, despite all of its growth issues, I don't actually think it's going to have a massive crash just because its real estate market has actually kind of underperformed over the last couple years already. But maybe a moderate decline in prices in New York. Salt Lake City, oh boy, this is a scary one. Prices here have gone up by 97% over the last 15 years, whereas wages and jobs have gone up by 25%. So Salt Lake fits that criteria of the Dallas, the Denver, the Austin, where the price growth is just not supported at all by the local wages and jobs. Boise, Idaho, which I think is the #1 housing bubble in America. We can see prices here have gone up by 116% over the last 15 years, and that's still factoring in like a big decline in prices that occurred in the last crash. Despite that, Boise still managed to appreciate so much in the last couple of years. Wage growth is good at 45%. Job growth is good at 30%. It's just not nearly enough to support 116% price growth. So hopefully you guys were able to stick with me through that rapid fire round. Hopefully I managed to cover your city. If I didn't manage to cover your city or metro area, hit the like button on this video if you haven't already, and leave a comment. Let me know what city you live in, and I'm going to try to respond to as many comments as I can about how your city is performing in terms of that trinity of home price growth, wage growth, and job growth over the last 15 years. Now, to address that central question from the beginning, do I think this housing crash is going to be worse than the one in 2008? Well, more broadly, more generally, no, I don't think so. I think the U.S. as a whole is not going to experience as big of a home value decline. And I think it's largely going to be due to the fact that the cities that got hit really hard last time, well, they're building way less. The wage growth is higher relative to the price growth. And I don't think they have as far to fall now as they did back then. However, there are certain cities which are definitely exposed, and we covered them in this video: the Denver, the Dallas, the Austin, the Salt Lake of the world, the Nashville of the world, the places that largely skirted the last housing crash. And thus, because they skirted the last housing crash, they're appreciating so much now. They're building more than ever. They're pretending like nothing can go wrong. Well, I do think a lot will go wrong in some of these markets going forward. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I spent a lot of time putting this data together. If you appreciate it and you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe. Amazingly, only about 15 to 20% of my views come from subscribers. I want to get that number up. I'd love to have you as a subscriber to this channel. I come out with 3 of these data-driven videos per week. And if you really like this content, think about becoming a channel member and sponsor. The cost is $5 a month, and you support me and this channel financially. And in return, you get some really cool perks. We actually have a member-exclusive community board here on YouTube where I post exclusive polls, data, and graphs. And in particular, you guys get to have an input on the videos that I post in the future. So if you do enjoy this content, and you want some of those perks, think about becoming a channel member. All right, guys, until next time, this is Nick from eVenture Consulting signing off.